The video I wanted to do today was going to talk a little bit about representation. As you know, a lot of the framework that I have comes from response-based practice. It's this framework that we can use, or that is used, to examine and evaluate in detail abuse, violence, and oppression that takes into account the conditions that enable it, and then use that research for the prevention and intervention. So when we ask the question, in what conditions or context is a person more likely to choose violence, the conversation cannot start with what causes violence. Instead, what needs to be asked is, in what conditions or contexts is a person more likely to choose violence and oppression, oppressive behaviors. Violent and oppressive behaviors are not an effect of a cause. It is a chosen course of action in a context. So we have to understand that between a stimulus and a response, there's a space. And in that space is the power to choose our response. Where unilateral actions done by one person, are portrayed or confused with mutual actions, like where an assault is portrayed as a conflict or an abusive relationship, where sexualized violence is portrayed as sex, people are more likely to do these bad actions. So the answer to the question of in what conditions or in what context is a person more likely to choose violence is when a society creates, by its language, contexts and conditions which conceal these acts from what they really are. Oppression and abuse and violence permeates our society. Knowing how to prevent it is the fact that everyone knows, at least knowing that it's prevalent. It is how prevalent it is. Fact that everyone knows at least one person, if not many, who have experienced it. In knowing this, it follows that we should consider the importance of learning about it and to teach others how to think about it and what they can do to prevent it. We all have a place in the social network of others. We all have part in stopping it, whether it is something that we want to take up consciously or not. We have to realize that we have a place in society for that. We individually either are working to prevent it or we are working to condone it, because language, when it comes to abuse, is never neutral. In this work, most of us focus on men's violence against women and children. So it would be prudent to remember that there is a great deal of interactional abuse and oppression going on, and it stands to reason that we should probably talk to each other about it as much as we possibly can, and about how to respond in the best ways possible. If we think about it, even in the field of professionals, like women who are psychologists and lawyers and police officers, people who work even in the field of interpersonal violence, are being victimized. Even when they seek out other people for support or to tell them about what a perpetrator did to them, the response inevitably is something like, "But you're educated, you're in a professional career, you should have known better." As if being victimized has anything to do with us as individuals. That is where the mistake comes in. It doesn't have to do with the individual. All it takes is for one person deciding to mistreat you. And it doesn't matter where you are in your career or what category of life you're in, whether you're married or you're single or you're educated or you're poor. If someone decides to oppress you or to abuse you, you get victimized. I understand that everyone is coming to the table here with different thoughts and ideas about how they see violence, how they see oppression, and how they are already advocating for women and children who have been victimized. But it's my hope that as I bring things to the table, that we're able to fit these in the practice of what you're doing. maybe adding to how you see these things, or incorporating it into your thought process, or into the process of how you advocate, because our overall goal is to help curb and slow our violence problem. It is because of the decade of work of many, many others in this field that even any of us are able to be here today. You guys know that a lot of the ideas I bring forth, I have to give credit to the Center for Response-Based Practice, the team that they have, because they have worked for over 35 years to develop this set of ideas, which they refer to as a framework of how we think about violence and oppression and how we go about doing the work of curbing it. In this video in particular, as I mentioned, I want to focus a little bit more on representation, because it's so incredibly important to keep in mind that the problem with violence is inevitably interlocked in our representation of it. We know that there's always at least two people involved in the act of oppression or violence. And if we have two people, we're going to have some type of interaction between them. So this means logically that if we want to get a complete picture of what happened, we need to get a picture of both sides, both parties. Let's compare this to producing a book report. But we are told in this book report that we can only read the pages on the left-hand side of the book. So we have a book and we're reading the left side, but we're expected to produce an accurate report without knowing what's on the right side pages. We're not allowed to read those. We're not allowed to look into those pages and see what's on them, but yet we're asked to give a report of what happened. So what I'm talking about here today is I'm making a case that part of how we could stop violence is to help us to realize that in the past, we may have been trying to read a situation or an interaction, and we have only been looking at the one side. We haven't been looking at the resistance. So I think thinking deeply along this line, we want to say along each side of a history of violence, say the left-hand side of the pages, we have to remember that there's a history of resistance, and until we bring those two things together, we're not going to get a clear picture of what's happening. So to recognize how people resist and respond, we have to get both sides. So let's look at an example that I've been thinking about. Well, first of all, let me go with this. So what is resistance and why don't we see it? Well, first we have to keep in mind that people respond and resist to all abuse and all injustice. Second, resistance is ever present when there's violence or oppression present. And third, that resistance can be either open or direct or subtle and disguised, depending on the power differential in the interaction and the context of how and where and the conditions of its happening, and how all of that is assessed by the victim in the process of that interaction. So picture in your mind that you're going down the road and you are driving, and all of a sudden someone starts to push you off the road. And you're like, what is your response to that? In other words, let's say, what is your resistance to what's happening to you? So let's put ourselves in that place right now and say, what would I do? Well, first of all, we have to realize that what we would do depends on the context of what's happening. At first, we want to say, well, I was being pushed off the road. There was nothing I could do. But when we think about it, we start assessing really quickly. We start going, okay, how big is the vehicle I'm in? Where is everybody else on the road? Am I on a deserted road, or am I on a major highway? Is the thing pushing me off the road? When I said someone's pushing off your road, you probably already automatically thought of a car. What if it's a motorcycle? What if it's a semi truck? Wouldn't your response or your resistance be different depending on the power differential? If it's a motorcycle, you might, push over and push it off the road. If it's a semi-truck, you're going to look for the berm of the road. Do you have a berm of the road, or do you have a cliff that's over there? So all of these things come into play. So the context of everything around you. So you don't stop, you don't flight or fright or flee. You are assessing every minute of every moment that's going on. Who is in the car with me? What is the risk I'm taking? Do I have children in the car? Do I have adults in the car? Do I have other people's family in the car? Am I by myself? Where am I? How big is my car? What time of the day? Where's the sun? I mean, there's so many things that go into evaluating. Can I get a description? If I do go off the road and that person drives on, do I have a description of their car? All of these things we are resisting in all different kinds of ways. So resistance is any act, any sort of act, either behavioral or emotional thought process, through which a person attempts to expose. So, I might be beeping my horn. That's exposing. I might be trying to withstand. Maybe I'll hold my ground if the vehicle's not any bigger than me, or I have a little bit of room to play. Or repel. Maybe I'll put on the brakes. Or I could stop it or prevent it. So anything I do to prevent, abstain, to strive against, to impede, to refuse to comply with in any way, or any way that I oppose this oppression that's coming towards me, including disrespect. Do I feel like this person's doing this on purpose? This makes me mad. So all of that comes into play in resistance, or even the conditions that make such actions possible. So we can see how the details of any social interaction in context of the unique, specific, and concrete circumstances change how we resist. So I'm going to talk a little bit more tomorrow, but that is what I wanted to put together today. So we'll talk to you again. Thanks.